February 23, 1856. A hidden basement beneath an Ohio Quaker meeting house. 3 newborn boys slide into the world, without a single cry. Above them, bloodhounds snarl and boots slam across the floorboards, hunting human lives. Yet the infants stay perfectly, impossibly silent, as if they already understood that one sound would mean death for everyone. What Ruth whispered to her sons in that darkness changed the bloodline forever. The wind is a living thing in southeastern Ohio that winter. It moves like a mourner across the frozen fields, rattling the bare sugar maples until they clack like bones. Snow doesn't fall so much as it hunts. Sharp, needling grains that find every gap in a coat, every crack in a soul. Cedar Mills isn't even a village on most maps in 1856. It's a hesitation between 2 ridges, a place travelers pass through only because the road demands it. 300 souls cling to the hillsides in cabins that lean like tired men. The only brick building for 20 miles is the Friends Meeting House, plain as a gravestone, its windows dark by sundown because Quakers believe pride hides in colored glass. But beneath that severe little building, something unholy and sacred is happening tonight. Elder Samuel Whitmore stands at the pulpit long after first day worship has ended. His hands, thick, scarred from plow and scythe, rest on the rail as though it is the only thing keeping him upright. 63 years have carved deep trenches around his gray eyes, but those eyes still burn with the same fire that once made a Virginia overseer back away from a 16-year-old field hand holding nothing but a hoe and the certainty of God's judgment. Samuel has been ferrying souls north for 8 years. He has memorized every lie that keeps a man free, every prayer that keeps a man alive. Tonight he is praying again, but the words feel thin, like paper held too close to a flame, because someone has talked. 3 nights earlier, a girl stumbled out of the treeline at dusk, belly swollen so large it seemed the child inside her must already be walking. She gave her name as Ruth. 19 winters, maybe 20. Skin the color of river silt after rain. Eyes older than sin. She asked for shelter in the soft, careful cadence of someone who had been taught letters in secret, the way other children are taught hymns. Samuel's wife, Martha, took one look and knew. This child would not wait for Canada. They hid her in the basement station 14, the deepest room, the one closest to the root cellar where the earth stays cool even in July. 7 other freedom seekers were already there, 2 families and a lone man named Joshua who could read the stars like scripture. They made room on the straw mattresses, past the single tallow candle so the flame wouldn't gutter out. Ruth thanked them, voice low, and then did something no one expected. She looked each person in the eye, slowly, deliberately, and told them something only they thought was secret. To Joshua, "Your sister in Richmond is safe. She crossed the river last new moon." To the young mother clutching her toddler, "He will have your husband's laugh, not his anger." To Samuel himself when they were alone, "The man who brought the cornmeal yesterday, his real name is Cullen. He rides with the Garretts. He will come back tonight." Samuel felt the words like a hand closing around his heart. He sent the cornmeal man away with polite lies and a colder stare than he knew he possessed. 2 hours later the dogs started barking on the ridge road. Now it is just past midnight. The temperature has fallen so low the well water has frozen in the bucket. Samuel stands listening to the wind when the coded knock comes. 3, pause, 2. He lifts the bar. Joshua bursts in, coat white with snow, eyes wild. They're coming. Garretts and 6 riders. Dogs. Torches. Someone sold us for 30 pieces of Kentucky silver. He doubles over, coughing frost. Less than 2 hours. Samuel does not waste breath on questions. He pulls the signal rope that hangs behind the pulpit. Down below, the trapdoor lifts a finger's width. Martha's face appears, candle behind her making a halo of her gray hair. Her mouth forms one word, Ruth. The labor has begun. There is no time. Samuel and 2 younger men, Elias and young Josiah Gregg, begin the evacuation through the tunnel that took 4 months and 3 broken shovels to dig. It runs north under the graveyard, emerging in a tangle of briars and deadfall where no dog wants to follow. 6 souls must go now, the 2 families and Joshua. Ruth cannot be moved. The babies are already crowning. Martha and her daughter Rebecca, barely 17 and steady as winter steel, descend the ladder with the birthing kit wrapped in oilcloth. The basement air is thick, earth, sweat, candle smoke, fear. Ruth lies on a straw tick placed over crates so the damp doesn't reach her. Her dress is pushed up, legs bare to the cold. A single quilt covers her chest, but she is not shivering. Not from chill, but from the force moving through her body like a tide that has waited a lifetime to break. Rebecca lights 2 more candles. The flames tremble as though afraid. Ruth's eyes are closed. Her lips move but no sound comes out. Martha kneels, experienced hands pressing gently along the taut drum of Ruth's belly. She has birthed more babies than she can count, white and black, free and not yet free. She knows the feel of one child, the feel of twins straining the womb like 2 colts in a single stall. What she feels now makes the candlelight blur. "Lord have mercy," she whispers. 3. Ruth's eyes open. In the flickering gold they look almost amber, reflecting something the candles are not giving off. "They waited for tonight," Ruth says, voice perfectly calm. "So the darkness would teach them silence." Martha wants to argue. Triplets are a death sentence for the mother in the best of circumstances, but another contraction folds Ruth in half without a cry. Rebecca's hands fly to her mouth. Outside, far off but drawing closer, dogs begin to bay. The next hour is a slow bleeding of time. Upstairs, Samuel bars the front doors, then the back. He drags benches across the floor to make noise patterns that will confuse searchers. He lights a single lantern and places it in the window, an old signal that the house is empty, worship long over. Then he descends into the tunnel with the last of the 6 fugitives, pulls the root cellar door shut behind him, and prays the dogs lose the scent among the graves. In the basement, Ruth's labor becomes something other than human. There is no screaming, no thrashing, only the wet, rhythmic sounds of a body doing work it was built for long before Eden. Martha has seen women bite through leather, claw the walls, curse God and husband alike. Ruth does none of these. She breathes like a woman underwater who has decided not to drown. The first boy arrives at 1:17 a.m. Martha marks the time because the pocket watch Samuel left behind ticks like a heartbeat against the dirt wall. The infant slides out blue-black with vernix, cord pulsing. Martha lifts him, ready to slap breath into him the way you wake a drunk. But the child is already breathing. Eyes open. Dark, depthless eyes that look straight into Martha's and through her, as if measuring the weight of every sin she has ever confessed in silent Quaker meeting. Before she can tie the cord, the second shoulder's free. Same silence, same ancient stare. The third follows so quickly Martha almost drops the second child. 3 boys, identical, slick with birth, lying side by side on the quilt like strange dark birds fallen from the same nest. And still not one cry. Above them, the world ends and begins again. Boots on the porch. The front door shuddering under fists. Garrett brothers' voices, whiskey rough, laughing because they know they have cornered God tonight. Open in the name of the law. A dog throws itself against the door, snarling like a demon. In the basement, the candles gutter as the trapdoor is pounded directly overhead. Dust sifts down onto the newborns' faces. One of the Garretts stands on the speaker's platform, heel driving into the wood again and again, searching for the hollow sound. The babies do not flinch. Their tiny chests rise and fall in perfect unison. Their eyes track the footsteps the way owls track mice. Slow, predatory, patient. Ruth gathers them to her breast with the way Mary must have gathered the child in the manger, except there is no manger here, only straw soaked with blood and melted snow. She begins to speak. Not English, not Gullah. Not any tongue Martha has ever heard on either side of the Ohio River. The words pour from her like water over river stones, round and continuous, older than Babel. Rebecca, raised on King James and silence, feels tears start without permission. The language feels like forgiveness and warning at the same time. 3 hours. 3 eternal hours while dogs tear at the foundation and lanterns sweep every corner. The Garretts rip up pews, smash the poor box, piss in the baptismal font they find behind the pulpit. One of them actually jumps up and down on the trapdoor until the hinges squeal. Still the babies make no sound. It is not the silence of the sleeping. It is the silence of soldiers behind enemy lines who know discovery is death. At 4:12 a.m. the riders mount up, cursing the cold and the liar who sent them on a fool's errand. Hooves clop away into the whitening dark. Only then, only when the last dog's bark has been swallowed by distance, do the triplets cry. But it is not a human sound. All three open their mouths at the exact same instant and release one long, keening note that rises and braids together until it seems to come from the walls themselves. It is not pain. It is recognition. It is the sound of three souls who have just learned the shape of the world and found it wanting. Martha's hands shake as she cuts the cords at last. Rebecca weeps openly. Ruth's bleeding will not stop. The placenta came whole the way it is supposed to, but the womb keeps contracting, trying to turn itself inside out like a sleeve. Martha packs it with clean rags, presses with all her weight, whispers every healing scripture she knows. Nothing helps. Ruth's eyes find Martha's across the candlelight. They are already going distant, like candles themselves sinking into dark water. They will know things, she says, voice barely a thread. Not just thoughts. Truth. The kind that burns. Protect them from those who would use it, and from themselves. Her gaze shifts to the three small faces now nestled against her. And teach them mercy, she whispers, because the world will not. The last breath that leaves her then does not return. Martha closes Ruth's eyes with trembling fingers. Rebecca rocks back and forth, hugging her knees, humming the only hymn she can remember through tears. Upstairs, dawn is a pale bruise on the horizon. Samuel emerges from the tunnel covered in mud and grave dirt, carrying the news that all six made the next station. He climbs down the ladder and finds his wife cradling three newborn boys and one dead mother whose blood has soaked clear through the straw to the earth below. For a long moment no one speaks. Then Samuel Whitmore, man who has faced down rifles and once and God 1,000 times, does something Martha has never seen in 40 years of marriage. He falls to his knees in the dirt and weeps like his heart is breaking open. Because some miracles are heavier than others. And these three silent boys, born under the boots of slave catchers, eyes already carrying secrets older than their mother's grave. These boys are about to teach the Whitmores, and everyone whose lives they touch, exactly how high the cost of truth can be. But that is a story for another night. Because the darkness has only just begun to lift, and some shadows, once seen, never stop following you home. Long pause. Wind howls. A single baby's cry echoes, then cuts to silence. Martha Whitmore buried Ruth on a February morning so cold the ground had to be thawed with bonfires. No marker. Just a flat fieldstone turned sideways so the frost wouldn't push it up. Three tiny boys slept through the burial, wrapped in one quilt, breathing in the same rhythm even in dreams. Samuel stood over the grave and made a vow no Quaker elder had ever been forced to make. These children will never wear chains. Not of iron. Not of fear. Not even of the truth, if the truth would destroy them. He lied. And the boys, only 9 days old, turned their heads toward him in the cradle and stared until he felt his soul laid bare. That was the first lie they ever tasted. From that moment on, Cedar Mills became a village living under invisible judgment. They named the boys the way friends always do, plain, biblical, heavy with prophecy. Caleb, whole heart. Ezra, help. Isaac, laughter. No one laughed when the names were spoken. Martha took them into the Whitmore cabin because someone had to nurse them, and she was the only woman still producing milk after her last child. She wrote in her private journal with a stub of pencil, pages hidden inside the family Bible. Tonight the three of them latched together, one on each breast, one on each arm, as though even hunger must be shared equally. When they are finished, they do not sleep the way other infants do. They watch. God forgive me. They watch me as if they already know every secret I have ever confessed in silence. By 6 months, the strangeness had teeth. Picture a late summer kitchen. Sunlight slants through the open door, dust motes drifting like slow gold. Martha is shelling peas with Rebecca. The babies lie on a quilt in the shaft of light. Suddenly, without a sound, all three heads swivel toward the empty doorway. Eyes wide, unblinking, Martha feels the hairs rise on her arms. Minutes crawl past. Then Widow Hargrove appears, apron twisted in her hands, face blotched from crying. Her husband beat her again the night before. She has come to ask for laudanum and to swear the bruises came from a fall. The boys do not cry. They simply stare until the woman flees the house without the medicine. That night Martha writes, "They are not yet crawling and already they are guardians, or jailers. I no longer know which." By their first birthday the entire village understood the rules. If you entered the Whitmore yard carrying a lie, even a small, polite one, the boys turned their backs. Not in anger, in sorrow, as if your falsehood physically hurt them. Children learned quickly. Tell the truth or the three little judges will shun thee. Adults learned slower. Elder Thomas Gregg once swore to Samuel that he had delivered every pound of corn promised to the station. The boys, toddling now, walked straight past him and pressed their faces into Martha's skirts. 2 hours later, the missing sack was found hidden under Gregg's own wagon seat. He never forgave himself. He left the society the following spring. But the gift sharpened into something crueler. In the fall of 1858, a peddler named Thompson spent the night in the meeting-house loft. He told charming stories, sold needles and ribbons, kissed babies. The triplets, barely 2, refused to enter the same room. They stood in the yard and screamed until their voices shredded. Thompson laughed it off as contrary young uns. 2 weeks later, the sheriff dragged him back through Cedar Mills in irons. His partner's body had been under the false bottom of the wagon the entire time he drank coffee in the Whitmore's kitchen. After that, people started coming on purpose. A farmer from Ross County wanting to know if his runaway son still lived. A mother from Portsmouth clutching a lock of her daughter's hair. They brought pies, coins, promises. Samuel turned most away, but the boys would sometimes slip past him, barefoot in the dust, and walk straight to the stranger. 3 small silhouettes against the setting sun. They never spoke much English yet, just pointed, or shook their heads, or, worst of all, looked at the visitor with naked pity. The village began to breathe differently when the triplets passed. You could feel it, an ache behind the sternum, the sense that every secret resentment, every buried shame, every lustful thought you'd confessed and reconfessed in the quiet of first-day meeting, was suddenly written across your face in letters of fire. Even the purest soul felt stained. Dr. William Harrison came once a month with his black bag and his skepticism. He measured skulls, tested reflexes, held candles close to their eyes to watch pupil response. He wrote furious letters to Cincinnati, to Philadelphia, to anyone who would listen. "I can find no hypertrophy of the optic nerve, no abnormality of the ear. And yet these children consistently demonstrate knowledge they have no natural means of acquiring. Either the laws of physiology are wrong, or we are in the presence of something medicine is not yet equipped to name." He aged 10 years in 4. Then came the winter of 1860 to 61. Snow deep enough to swallow a horse to the hocks. Lincoln's election still raw in every throat. Slave catchers riding openly now. Federal papers flapping like black flags. The Underground Railroad bleeding people north faster than it could stanch the wounds. One January morning the boys woke screaming. Not the petulant cry of children denied a sweet. A single, shared keen 3 throats, 1 voice, that rose and fell like a saw through bone. Martha ran in from the kitchen, apron full of kindling. They were rigid in their trundle bed, eyes rolled back to the whites, tiny fists clenched so tight the nails drew blood from their palms. Nothing calmed them. Not warm milk. Not hymns. Not the desperate rocking of 3 women at once. 6 hours of unbroken grief. Then, as suddenly as it began, silence. They slept for the first time in their lives. 2 days later, a half-frozen conductor stumbled into the dooryard leading a limping horse. 11 people, 3 of them children, had been taken 40 miles south. The pregnant woman in the group gave birth in the snow while the catchers laughed. Mother and baby dead before sunrise. The timing matched the boys' torment to the minute. Samuel Whitmore locked himself in the smokehouse and vomited until his ribs ached. 3 weeks later it happened again. Shorter, sharper. This time the news came faster. A conductor shot in the back near Portsmouth. Again, the boys had felt the bullet before it was fired. Word spread beyond Ohio. Desperate families began arriving in wagons, on foot, by night. Samuel posted guards. Still the boys escaped. They would find the visitors anyway. 3 small ghosts materializing at the bedside of a grieving father, or standing silently in front of a mother who had not slept in 93 nights. The case everyone still whispers about happened in April 1861. The Brennans came from Chillicothe. Their daughter Mary, 16, red-haired, trusting, had vanished on the stage road to Columbus. 3 months missing. Every river dragged, every well searched. Hope had already held its own funeral. Samuel met them on the porch and refused. "I'll not make profits of children." But while he spoke, the front door creaked open by itself. Caleb, Ezra, and Isaac walked out in their nightshirts, barefoot in the cold mud. They lined up in front of Mrs. Brennan like soldiers reporting for duty. Then they began to whisper, that liquid, flowing tongue Ruth had used the night they were born. Mrs. Brennan dropped to her knees in the dirt. After perhaps 5 minutes, Isaac stepped forward and laid one small hand on her wet cheek. He pointed southeast, toward the river. "She's alive," he said. His first complete sentence in English anyone could remember. "But the preacher isn't a preacher." They found Mary 2 days later in a root cellar, chained with 2 other girls, waiting for the New Orleans boat. The preacher hanged a month later, still protesting his innocence. The boys did not attend the trial. They stayed in bed for a week, burning with fever no medicine could break. After that, even Samuel stopped pretending. He built them a small room behind the meeting house, plain walls, 1 high window, a door that locked from the inside. A sanctuary or a cage, he was no longer sure. They spent more and more time there, speaking only to one another, drawing symbols on the floorboards with charcoal no one could read. Dr. Harrison's last visit was in December 1862, lungs already rattling with the consumption that would kill him. He sat with the boys for an hour and wrote his final note by candlelight. "I have watched them grow from infants into beings who seem to carry the accumulated grief of the entire state upon their shoulders. Their pulses beat as one. Their nightmares are shared. They no longer play. They seldom smile. When they look at me, I feel transparent, weighed, and found wanting. Not by cruelty, but by perfect, merciless clarity. Whatever Ruth passed to them in that basement, it was not a gift. It was a sentence. And the sentence is this: they will never be allowed to look away." He closed his journal, coughed blood onto the page, and died before spring. The war came closer. Armies marched and countermarched through the border counties. Cannon smoke drifted north on the wind like dirty snow. And the boys, now 6 years old, pale as parchment, eyes too old for any child, began waking in the nights with new kinds of screams. Not for fugitives this time. For soldiers. Blue coats and gray, it made no difference. They felt the bayonet enter a boy from Indiana the same way they felt the mini ball tear through a father from Georgia. Every death south of the Ohio River was a needle through their shared heart. Martha found them once standing in the yard at 3 a.m., arms outstretched toward the dark, tears streaming, mouths open in perfect silent O's of horror. Thousands would die that day at Shiloh. The boys knew before the telegraph did. By the summer of 1861, the Whitmores barely recognized the children they had sworn to protect. They spoke less and less. When they did, it was in questions no child should ask. Why do men lie to the ones they love most? Will the war ever run out of blood? If God sees everything, why does he let the bad men win sometimes? And the worst, whispered by Ezra one night when fever made him delirious. When we grow up, will we still have to feel it all? Martha had no answer. She held him until dawn, rocking, praying the way her mother had taught her. Silently, desperately, without cease. Because some prayers are too heavy for words. And some children are born already carrying the sins of the world on tongues that never meant to taste them. The war was only beginning. So was their crucifixion. Long, aching pause. Wind. Then 3 small voices whispering in unison, too soft to make out the words. Fade to black. The summer of 1861 tasted of gunpowder even in Ohio. Every southbound breeze carried the faint, sweet rot stink of battlefields too far away to see but close enough to feel in the marrow. Cedar Mills had become a listening post for agony. And the 3 small boys who lived behind the meeting house were its unwilling antennae. They no longer played. They stationed themselves at the south windows like sentinels, palms pressed to the cold glass, staring toward the invisible river as though they could see clear to hell. When Samuel asked what they saw, Isaac answered without turning. Too many people are about to stop breathing all at once. 3 days later, a rider galloped in with the news of Bull Run. 28,000 men had marched out. Nearly 3,000 never stood up again. The boys had felt every one. From that day on, the war lived inside their ribcages. They began predicting battles the way farmers predict rain, by the ache in old wounds. A week of low, constant whimpering, Shiloh. 2 days of nosebleeds that would not clot, Perryville. One terrible dawn when all 3 convulsed on the floor, foaming at the mouth. Antietam. The telegraph always confirmed the dates. The casualty lists always matched the depth of their screams. But it was the personal deaths that broke the village. September 1861. A Union private named Thomas Caldwell, 19, freckled, homesick, stopped to water his horse. He carried a letter from his mother tucked inside his jacket and a smile that still belonged to a boy. The triplets took one look at him and began whispering so fast their words blurred into a single hiss. Ezra stepped forward, placed a small hand over Caldwell's heart, and spoke in the flat voice they used when the future was already written. You won't see Marietta again. The man riding with you will shoot you for $23 and the price of a bottle. 3 nights from now. By the river. Caldwell laughed, ruffled Ezra's hair, called it kid talk. 3 nights later his body floated face down near Blennerhassett Island. 1 bullet in the back, pockets turned out. The deserter who killed him was caught trying to buy whiskey with a blood-stained $5 note that still folded around Mrs. Caldwell's letter. After that, people crossed the road when the boys passed. Yet they kept coming. Mothers wanting to know if their sons still walked, wives clutching ambrotypes, preachers asking whether God had turned his face from America. Samuel built a higher fence. The boys simply walked through it anyway, drawn by grief the way crows are drawn to carrion. Then came the night that carved itself into every surviving soul in Cedar Mills. April 1862. 12 freedom seekers arrived after midnight, 5 men. For women, 3 children. Led by James Morrison, a conductor Samuel had known and trusted for 11 years. Morrison's face was wind-burned, his laugh still warm, his Bible still worn from honest use. He carried the group's fear in his own shoulders the way a good shepherd carries a lame lamb. The instant he crossed the threshold, the boys detonated. Not tears, not whimpers, a single, inhuman howl that rose through 3 small throats and shook dust from the rafters. They pointed at Morrison with identical trembling fingers, faces purple with effort. Death! He wears death like a coat. Tomorrow night at Miller's Creek, he will call into the dark and the guns will answer. Morrison went white beneath his tan. He had never seen the boys behave this way. Samuel tried to calm them, tried to reason, tried to pray. The children only screamed louder, clawing at their own arms until they drew blood. The freedom seekers huddled in terror. One woman began speaking in tongues. A little girl wet herself. Samuel faced the worst choice of his life. On one side, 12 desperate human beings and a man he had broken bread with for a decade. On the other, 3 children whose every previous warning had come true in blood. He chose the middle road. He let them go at dawn but sent 2 armed friends, Josiah Gregg and Elihu Stanley, to shadow the group at a distance. He told himself it was extra protection. It was penance. The next night, the moon was a thin, cruel blade. At Miller's Creek, the boys woke screaming again, louder than before. Martha found them standing in the yard in their nightshirts, arms stretched toward the southwest, mouths open in perfect silent horror. They stayed that way for 2 hours, statues carved from grief, until the screaming turned to a low, continuous moan that only dogs could hear. At sunrise, Josiah and Elihu came back gray-faced and shaking. They had watched from the treeline as Morrison led the group into the clearing by the creek. He raised his lantern 3 times, the old safe passage signal. 20 slave catchers stepped out of the shadows with rifles already cocked. 7 died where they stood. 5 were chained. Morrison pocketed $300 in gold coin and walked north whistling. When the witnesses finished speaking, the meeting house was silent enough to hear hearts break. The boys sat on the front bench, legs dangling, faces blank. Isaac looked up at Samuel with eyes that had already buried hope. "We told you," he said quietly. "People never listen until the blood is real." Samuel aged 20 years in that moment. He never smiled again. After Miller's Creek, the village stopped pretending the boys were merely gifted. They became something to be feared. People lowered their voices when passing the Whitmore cabin. Children were warned not to stare. Some families left Cedar Mills entirely, claiming the ground itself had turned sour. The boys withdrew deeper into themselves. They spoke only when necessary, and then in short sentences that carried the weight of prophecy. They stopped asking why men lied. They already knew. Winter 1863 arrived like judgment. Snow fell for 40 days. The war grew teeth. And into this frozen silence rode Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, 34 years old, one of the first women to hold a medical degree in Ohio, spectacles perpetually fogged, hands steady as a surgeon's, heart already scarred by field hospitals at Shiloh and Corinth. She had read Dr. Harrison's dying letters. She had pulled strings in Cincinnati, pleaded with Quaker elders, and finally convinced Samuel that science, if it could name the thing living in his house, might also find a way to save it. She arrived with crates of strange instruments. Galvanic batteries, magnetometers, glass plates coated with silver nitrate, wires thin as spider silk. For 6 months she turned the back room of the meeting house into a laboratory that smelled of ozone and candle smoke. The boys allowed her to test them. They had stopped caring what adults did. What she discovered rewrote the boundaries of the possible. First, the physiological link between the 3 bodies was absolute. When she pressed a needle into Caleb's fingertip in one room, Ezra and Isaac, separated by 2 closed doors, jerked and bled in perfect synchrony. When she passed a magnet near Isaac's temple, the other 2 flinched as though struck. Brainwave tracings, crude by today's standards but revolutionary then, showed identical patterns whether the boys were together or apart. She began to speak of them not as 3 children, but as a single organism in tripartite form. Then came the deception trials. She brought in 20 volunteers from Chillicothe. 10 told the truth about their names and occupations. 10 lied. The boys sat blindfolded in the center of the room. Every lie produced an immediate spike on the magnetometer needle. Every truth left it still. The correlation was perfect. But the final experiment broke even Dr. Hartwell. She asked a volunteer, a Confederate prisoner under guard, to silently picture the moment he bayoneted a Union drummer boy at Fort Donelson. He was instructed to feel nothing, show nothing. The man obeyed, face blank. The magnetometer needle buried itself against the stop. All 3 boys collapsed weeping. Afterward, alone with Samuel by the fire, Elizabeth laid out her conclusions in a voice stripped of wonder, only dread. These children do not read faces or voices. They read the electrical storms inside other human minds. When a person lies, fears, hates, or hungers to kill, their brain generates a specific electromagnetic signature. The boys perceive it the way you or I perceive red or the scent of rain. Distance is irrelevant. Intent is irrelevant. They are, quite literally, tuned to the frequency of human evil. She paused, staring into the flames. And it is killing them. Samuel asked the question he had carried for 7 years. Can it be removed? Can they be made normal? Elizabeth's laugh was bitter. Only if you can remove the ability to see or hear. This is not an extra sense, Elder Whitmore. It is their only sense. Everything else, sight, touch, speech, is secondary. They live inside the thoughts and terrors of every soul for 50 miles. And the radius is growing. There is more. She exhumed Ruth's body under cover of night. The corpse, miraculously preserved by winter cold and Quaker linen, showed sky-high levels of mercury, lead, and arsenic in hair and bone. Chemicals used to fix indigo dye on the Kentucky plantation where Ruth had worked pregnant and chained to the vats. The same poisons that drove plantation workers mad had, in Ruth's womb, performed an act of terrible alchemy. They did not kill the fetuses. They rewrote them. Elizabeth's final, classified page, sealed by the War Department and not opened again until 1924, contains the sentence that still chills every researcher who reads it. The mutation is dominant and stable. Every child these boys' father will inherit the trait. Every grandchild will be stronger still. Within 4 generations their descendants may perceive thought itself as clearly as speech. We are not looking at gifted children. We are looking at the first members of a new human species, one that will eventually be forced to judge or rule the old. She looked up at Samuel with eyes that had seen too many amputations. Pray God they choose mercy, because one day the rest of us will have no secrets left to hide. Samuel burned the report that night, but not before memorizing every word. Outside, the snow kept falling, covering the graves of 7 betrayed souls who had died because adults refused to listen to children. Inside the meeting house, 3 8-year-old boys sat in a perfect triangle on the cold floor, holding hands, staring at nothing. They were no longer whispering. They were listening. And somewhere south of the river, 1,000 men were already screaming inside their skulls. The war had years left to run. So did the boys' sentence. But something new had begun to stir behind their ancient eyes. Not sorrow anymore. Not even resignation. It was the first faint flicker of judgment. And Cedar Mills slept uneasier than ever, knowing that the day was coming when those 3 small heads would turn, as one, and look north, directly at us. Long silence. Wind howls. Then the soft, synchronized sound of 3 boys breathing in perfect unison. Fade to absolute black. February 1863. The snow was so deep the horses sank to their bellies. Cedar Mills looked like a village that had already been buried and was only waiting for someone to say the prayer. Inside the meeting house, Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell packed her instruments with shaking hands. Her final report, 72 pages of measurements, diagrams, and a warning written in letters large enough to haunt dreams, lay sealed in oilskin. Samuel Whitmore stood at the window watching the road. He already knew what was coming. At 4:17 a.m. the boys woke him, not with cries, but with silence so complete it felt like drowning. He found them in the kitchen, 3 small figures in wool coats 2 sizes too large, cloth bundles at their feet, faces lit by a single candle. Caleb spoke first. They're almost here. Blue coats this time, with papers that say they own us. Isaac added, voice soft as falling ash. They want to put us in iron rooms under Washington. Cut pieces away until they understand the music inside our heads. Then they'll breed us like dogs. Ezra, who had not spoken aloud in months, looked straight at Samuel and finished the thought all 3 shared. If we stay, Cedar Mills burns. Everyone who ever helped us will hang. We've seen the fires. Samuel begged. He offered to hide them in the caves, to fight, to die if needed. Caleb touched the old man's weathered cheek with a gentleness no 8-year-old should possess. You gave us the only childhood we were ever allowed. Now we have to give the world the only future it might deserve. They left before dawn. 3 small sets of footprints in the snow, perfectly spaced, perfectly straight, walking south toward the river bluffs as though pulled by a string only they could see. By the time the federal marshals kicked in the door at sunrise, the tracks had already been erased by wind. The boys were simply gone. Samuel Whitmore never saw them again. But sometimes, on the anniversary of their birth, he would wake to find 3 smooth river stones on the windowsill, black, warm, humming faintly against the palm. He kept everyone in a cedar box under his bed until the day he died. The war ended. The meeting house fell into ruin. The world moved on. But the bloodline did not. Scattered reports began surfacing like bones working their way to the surface of a grave. 1879, Pennsylvania. A girl predicts a mine collapse 3 days early, saves 112 men. 1883, Texas. Twin boys find a kidnapped child buried beneath a church floor. 1892, California. A boy in San Francisco exposes a city councilman's embezzlement simply by refusing to shake his hand. 1917, France. An American doughboy walks through no man's land untouched because he felt every shell before it left the barrel. Doctors called it coincidence. Newspapers called it miracle. The descendants called it Tuesday. They learned early to hide. They married quietly, moved often, taught their children 3 unbreakable rules. Never reveal the full measure of what you know. Never let them take you alive. Always leave 1 stone on the windowsill for the ones who come after. Generations passed. The sensitivity grew sharper, crueler. By the 1950s, some could hear a lie across a crowded room like a wrong note in a symphony. By the 1980s, a few could feel a murder being planned 3 states away. By the 2000s, certain bloodlines no longer needed to touch a photograph to know if the missing child was still breathing. They stayed hidden. Until February 23, 2024. The address in the 1923 letter led to a forgotten farm 10 miles outside what used to be Cedar Mills. The house had been rebuilt twice, but the foundation stones were the same ones laid by Quaker hands in 1855. 50 people came that night. Some were academics carrying Hartwell's declassified papers like holy relics. Some were lineal descendants of the Underground Railroad families, drawn by stories their grandmothers whispered on their deathbeds. Many were simply people who had spent their entire lives feeling everyone else's secrets like sandpaper on raw skin. They arrived separately. They parked a mile away and walked the rest in silence. No phones. No recordings. No names spoken aloud. Inside the farmhouse, 3 elderly men waited. Identical, silver-haired, eyes still black as wet river stone. They looked 90, but moved like 30, and spoke with one voice that somehow came from 3 throats. No one who was there will describe what happened next. But in the months that followed, certain things became public record. A cold case unit in Chicago solved 17 missing child murders in 6 weeks. A federal task force on human trafficking quietly dismantled 3 rings operating between Florida and Ontario. A senator from Kentucky abruptly withdrew from a re-election campaign after a private meeting he refuses to discuss. Dr. Sarah Chun, the Johns Hopkins neurologist who attended the gathering, published a single line in an otherwise dry paper. The predicted latency for full-spectrum emotional resonance in select lineages, 2031 plus or minus 18 months. And across the country, in quiet houses, in locked bedrooms, children began waking from nightmares they could not explain, pressing their small hands to television screens when certain politicians spoke, asking their parents questions no child should know to ask. Why is that man smiling when he wants to hurt people? Why does the newsman's voice feel like broken glass? Mommy, when do we get to stop pretending? Their parents, descendants who had hidden for 5 generations, look at one another across kitchen tables and finally understand the river stones that appear every February on their windowsills are counting down. Because the watching is almost over. The revealing is about to begin. Somewhere in Ohio tonight, 3 ancient men who were once 8-year-old boys sit in a circle on a farmhouse floor. They no longer need to speak aloud. They simply breathe in perfect unison, terrible unison, feeling the electromagnetic storm of 8 billion human minds the way you or I feel sunshine on skin. And for the first time in 168 years, they are smiling. Not because the world has become kinder, but because it is finally ready to be seen. The next step in human evolution was never coming whether we invited it or not. It was born in silence, under slave-catcher boots, in a basement soaked with a dying mother's blood. It learned mercy from Quakers who paid for kindness with guilt. It learned patience from a century and a half of hiding. And now it is here, watching, waiting, and remembering every promise ever made in that darkness. They have not forgotten the love. They have not forgotten the betrayal. And when the moment comes, when the last veil of lies becomes too thin to bear, They will step out of the shadows all at once. Not as prophets, not as monsters, simply as the children of Ruth. The ones who were never allowed to cry, until the whole world finally does. Long, long silence. Then, very softly, the sound of 3 heartbeats, slow, steady, ancient, beating as one. Fade to black. February 23, 2032, will be the 176th anniversary of the night 3 boys were born in silence, while evil stood overhead. If you feel someone watching, when no one is there, you already know why.